Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be recapping everything that went down in A Crown of Gilded Bones in preparation for A War of Two Queens, which will be released later this month. Alright guys, so this recap video is solely going to focus on A Crown of Gilded Bones. I've already made videos for From Blood and Ash and A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, so I will leave those recap videos linked in the cards and in the description. Now this is going to be broken up into parts. I'm going to start out with just a summary of everything that happened in A Crown of Gilded Bones, and then I'm going to do a segment where I just talk about like the deities, the gods, and the bloodlines, and all of that because there's so much information given to us in A Crown of Gilded Bones. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram and Goodreads accounts, both linked down below in the description. With all that out of the way, let's talk about A Crown of Gilded Bones. Alright guys, and one more thing before we begin, I just want to say this should not be watched in lieu of actually reading A Crown of Gilded Bones. This is just for people that don't want to go back and do a full reread before the new book comes out. Also, similar to my Crescent City video, there might be some rough editing in this. It is very hard to summarize a very long book in a short period of time without taking any breaks and looking down at my notes, so I'm sorry if the editing isn't as sharp as my editing normally is. And with all that out of the way, let's jump into the plot. Alright guys, so A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire ended with Poppy being lured by Beckett, who is a young wolven, into this cave and then being surrounded and attacked by dissenters and Atlantians. So Poppy ends up using her gifts and pretty much blows up all of the people that are attacking her. And when this happens, the wolven are drawn to her and they all surround her. So then Queen Eloana and King Valen, who are Castile's parents and the king and queen of Atlantia, and Alistair, who's kind of like one of the counselors under the king and queen, really close with the king, ends up also showing up to see what is happening. So there's some talking, some discussion. Queen Eloana ends up bowing to Poppy, claims she's a deity, and then says, "Bow before your new queen." So that is where Kingdom of Flesh and Fire leaves off. So starting with A Crown of Gilded Bones, that's happening. Queen Eloana is bowing. They're all discussing. They're talking about Poppy being a deity, but then Queen Eloana kind of backtracks and says, well, she wasn't really crowned, so she's not really a queen. And then Alistair ends up attacking Poppy, saying he's defending the king and queen of Atlantia. So we think that Kieran, Castile, and Jasper being Kieran's father, are all killed because they're struck with these gray arrows from the guards that Alistair told to attack. So then Poppy ends up blacking out and wakes up in this crypt. So she's very cold and can't use her powers for some reason, and we find out that she's actually chained to the floor by the bones of the deities, and they're like zapping her power. So then Alistair explains that he was really the one that killed or allowed the Dark One to bring the Craven to kill Poppy's mom and dad. If you remember from the original books, Poppy was attacked when she was younger by Craven. Both of her parents were killed, and that's why she was raised by the king and queen in Carcedonia. Or not raised by them. She was raised by Duchess Tyrman, Duke. You guys know what I mean. Anyway, that's why she was raised over there. So we also find out that Commander Jensen, and if you were anything like me, you did not remember who this character was. I had to go back and look. Commander Jensen, who was actually from Blood and Ash, he was one of the people that helped Castile pretend to be a royal guard and kind of infiltrate his way into the royal guard. So Commander Jensen actually is a changeling, and he turned into Beckett in order to lure Poppy. So it wasn't really Beckett. Unfortunately, we find out that Alistair and Jensen killed Beckett when he woke up when he wasn't supposed to. We also find out that Alistair doesn't really believe that he rules under the king and queen. He thinks he's doing the best for Atlantia, and there's a whole group of other people that are actually involved in this. I'll talk about them a little bit later. So then we find out that Alistair is actually going to give Poppy over to the Ascended. He's doing this because he believes that Poppy is actually foretold in this prophecy and that she's going to be the reason Atlantia is destroyed. And he can't outright kill her because then it's going to cause a fight between the wolven and the Atlanteans, and it's going to be a big problem. So he's going to give her to the Ascended, and hopefully either the Ascended will kill her or it'll start a war, and it goes from there. So while Alistair is bringing Poppy to the Ascended, a fight breaks out and we find out that Kieran, Castile, and King Valen are actually all alive and they're all there to help Poppy and save her. And everything's going pretty well until Poppy is fatally wounded. Now Castile obviously cannot deal with this. Poppy is the love of his life, so he decides that he's going to ascend her, which is not okay because if that happens, she's going to turn into a vampire, or so we think. So Valen, his father, is fighting, being like, no son, don't do this, and Kieran's holding him back, and then Castile ends up turning Poppy, we think, into a vampire. So then later, Poppy wakes up and she is blood hungry and she ends up attacking Kieran, and then Castile ends up giving Poppy his blood, and then they have some spicy time, and then it turns out she's not a vampire. So she actually doesn't need to ingest blood, we don't think. She's able to go out during the day, and she's pretty much in control. And we know that vampires that are first turned shouldn't be in control for like the first 2 years. So we know she's not a vampire, but we're not exactly sure what she is yet. She did drink Castile's blood. So now Poppy, Castile, and Kieran are gonna go back to Atlantia to talk to the king and queen, Castile's parents. All right, and I forgot to mention that prior to Poppy and Castile leaving to talk to the king and queen, Poppy finds out from Castile that Castile and Kieran are keeping Alistair alive in the dungeon, and Castile is like, you know what, this is your kill. If you want to kill him, go right ahead. So she goes down to the dungeon, she kind of talks to Alistair for a little bit, he pisses her off, so she slits his throat, it's really terrible. And then all of the wolven come and actually end up eating Alistair, and it was gruesome, but yet awesome. So then after all of this happens, the whole group is traveling to the king and queen, and they end up being, actually I think the king is with them, so I think they're just traveling to the queen. They end up being attacked by this group of people, and there is a man on top of this wall in front of them who is wearing a mask, and he mentions Lockwood, which is where Poppy's parents and Poppy were attacked by the Craven in the very beginning of the series. So Poppy thinks to herself that, like, how does this person know about Lockwood? Like, no one should really know about this whole treachery. And then they all attack. Poppy fights. She's really good at fighting. Castile's really loving the fact that she's fighting. All of that happens, and then King Valen ends up saying, those aren't dissenters. Those are actually the unseen. So the unseen are a whole different group of people. I believe they're the people that actually Alistair was working with, although that's never really stated. And the unseen are for Atlantia. So they don't believe like the king and queen are like the rightful king and queen. They just want to do, I believe, what's best for Atlantia. I might have to go back and reread that, but that's my feeling so far. And they're ruled by somebody else. We don't know who that is yet. Personally, I'm thinking it's the Dark One, but we'll see. So anyway, they're traveling and they finally make it to the Atlantia where the king and queen reside. Now also, while they are traveling, all of these wolven and all the people at Atlantia are calling Poppy Lisa, and that means like the queen, which is absolutely adorable. So a lot of wolven and like the children of the wolven are all like bowing down to her, and it's so great just to see Poppy so empowered. So then they make it to the throne room area, and they decide to talk to the king and queen. So right off the bat, the queen, Eloana, is very skeptical. She's very excited to see Castile again and actually have like a good reunion with him. But also, she isn't really sure she can trust Poppy because Poppy was trained as the maiden. She was raised by the Ascended. So do they really want her to be queen just because she has the blood of a deity? So they kind of go off, and Eloana and Poppy end up having this conversation. So during this talk with the queen, we find out that Poppy is actually descended from Malec. If you remember, Malec was once married to Queen Eloana. He was the rightful king of Atlantia, and then he ended up having an affair with Isbeth and turned Isbeth into the first vampire. So we already know about all of this lore. But then we find out that Poppy is actually the child of Malec, which doesn't make sense because we also find out that Queen Eloana actually entombed her ex-husband into this crypt by, I believe it's like the Godswood, and he's been entombed for longer than Poppy has been alive. So it doesn't make sense that he is her father, but he has to be her father. They even share a resemblance. We also find out, which is pretty terrible, that Queen Eloana and King Valen actually knew what Alistair was doing, and that Alistair knew that she was descended, or Poppy was descended from Malec, because his parents sought out Alistair to help them get into Atlantia and save their daughter that had these special powers. So Alistair right away was like, she looks like Malec, has the powers of Malec, we can't have her be a threat to the throne, so that's why he let the Craven come, or he allowed the Dark One to let the Craven come and like attack. So Queen Eloana and Valen knew about this all along, so that's kind of messed up of them. But anyway, Poppy needs to find out like what's really going on. So prior to this happening, I forgot to mention that the whole group was also attacked by these like undead bodies known as germs or germs. I'm not really sure how it's pronounced. And the only way to create these germs was from the Elysium, which is this place that no one thinks they can go to. It's pretty much where the gods are sleeping. So Kieran, Poppy, and Castile decide that they are going to go there in order to kind of to solve some of the secrets that are coming up with Poppy's past. Like, how is she descended from Malec? Also, I think I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, this is very chaotic, but Malec is actually the grandchild of Nyktos, who is like the king of gods. And if you've read Shadow in the Ember, which I highly suggest you do, you know a lot more about him. But I'm going to get more into that a little bit later. So anyway, while all of this is going on, Poppy is also grappling with the fact that she might have to take the crown in Atlantia. Now, she was not raised to be a princess. She was raised to be the maiden or a queen. So she really does not want to take the crown away from Eloana and Valen. And now Castile is willing to do whatever Poppy wants. So Queen Eloana ends up telling Poppy that she has like a week to decide what she wants to do. Now, while all of this is going on, Venetta ends up coming to Poppy and saying that her brother, Ian, now if you remember, Ian was Poppy's possibly half-brother. They were very close. And then Ian ended up getting shipped off to the Blood Queen and ended up being turned into Ascended, or at least that's what Castile believes. So Poppy has been wanting to see her brother since the series began. So she obviously really wants to see Ian, and Venetta says that Ian wants to meet with Poppy. Now this could be a trap, and Poppy is also very heartbroken to hear that Venetta believes that Ian is definitely an Ascended. He has black eyes. He came out during the dark. So Poppy decides to meet with him. And I think she even says to Castile, like, I'm going to kill him if it turns out that he is an Ascended, just to give him peace, because she knows her brother would never want that for himself. So they go and meet with Ian, and on the way to meet with Ian, they end up seeing this cat, this very large cat that Castile says that he didn't believe, like, existed anymore. So anyway, they go to meet with Ian, and Ian has these guards with him, and one tiny little guard in particular who is, like, very good at being an assassin. And he's obviously turned into Ascended. And he tells Poppy, like, give up, how could you marry the Dark One? And is being very condescending to her. And then Castile is whatever. So then Ian ends up hugging Poppy and says, you need to go to the gods in order to, like, get something to defeat the Revenant. And we don't know what the Revenant is yet, but then we find out that Ian is actually in there somewhere. And when Poppy was about to plunge the dagger into Ian's heart, she finds out that Ian is actually still her brother, and it's a very cute moment. So then Ian is just pretending to be going along with the Ascended. So then Poppy and Castile leave. It wasn't really like a trap. Ian goes his own way, they go their own way. And then Poppy decides she's going to take the crown and she's just going to try to save Atlantia. So Poppy and Cass and all of them travel back to the king and queen. While they're working their way back, they get attacked again by more of these undead germs and by the unseen. So they manage to get out of that pretty much unscathed. Then they meet with the king and queen. They say they want to take up the mantle and become the new king and queen of Atlantia. It happens that all of the people that are necessary to make that happen are there, all of the counselors. So it's a pretty smooth process, and Poppy becomes the queen of Atlantia, and Castile becomes the king, and it's a great time. So then they decide that they're going to go meet with Nyktos, because Poppy's brother Ian had said that the fire of the gods is the only thing that'll be able to kill the Revenants, and they believe that Nyktos is guards, which are actually Draken. So Draken are like dragons or people that can turn into dragons. Once again, if you read Shadow in the Ember, really, really cool. So they end up journeying to the Elysium. They're able to get there pretty safely, and they meet with a Draken first, which is just a giant dragon that they didn't think actually still lived anymore, and everyone's completely blown away. And then they meet with Nyktos himself. So if you've read A Shadow in the Ember, you know who Nyktos is, you know all about him. But I was so excited in my reread, because reading A Shadow in the Ember and then reading this, it's a completely different experience. So then Nyktos informs Poppy that he will not give her his guards because she's essentially not ready yet. You can look up the exact quote he says, but she's kind of disappointed. They end up traveling back, and now they're going to meet with the Blood Queen in order to try to figure out a way to, like, stop this war from happening, because the Blood Queen is pretty much promising that there is going to be a war unless Castile and Poppy meet with her. So now Poppy and Castile know this could be a trap. They try to figure out a way in order to stay safe, but this is still very dangerous. So they travel to the Blood Queen, and when they get there, Ian meets with them. We also meet with that little tiny assassin girl I mentioned earlier, And then the Blood Queen is there, and it turns out the Blood Queen was actually expecting them. It was a trap the entire time, and whatever. So then they're all in this room, and out walks Malec, or Malec. Why are these names so similar? So anyway, Castiel's brother, Malec, was captured when Malec was trying to rescue Castiel, when Castiel was a prisoner of the Blood Queen before From Blood and Ash. So the entire reason Castiel was even pretending to be Poppy's personal guard and doing all of these things and trying to kidnap Poppy was to get his brother Malec back. So turns out Malec is working with the Blood Queen, which was a huge surprise no one saw coming. So then Malec explains to Poppy that he was her ascension, and the Blood Queen had planned on marrying Malec to Poppy, and thereby they would rule Atlantia and Spessazen and all of that area. So we also find out that the Blood Queen, is actually Isbeth from the very beginning, when Malec being Nyktos' descendant, was married to Queen Eloana, Castiel's mother, and then had an affair with Isbeth and then turned Isbeth into the first vampire. The Blood Queen is that Isbeth. But then we find out that she didn't actually get turned into a vampire because Malec was a deity or from the gods. We actually find out that Malec was a god. I'm just going to tell you right now. We find out since Malec was a god, he was able to turn Isbeth into whatever she is now. So she has all of these crazy powers. She's able to be out in the sunlight, and she's not actually a vampire. We also find out that Queen Eloana knew about this the entire time. So wow, I really disliked her character at that point. So then Poppy is shocked to find out that the Blood Queen is actually her mother, and she believes that Malec was her father, who was a god. We find out that's not true, but that's a little bit later. So Poppy is talking to the queen. She's saying she's not going to bow to anyone and not going to work with her. So then the Blood Queen ends up killing, or the Blood Queen, who is actually Isbeth, ends up killing Ian right in front of her. We also find out that Tawny is still alive, Tawny being the handmaiden of Poppy in From Blood and Ash, but she ends up being wounded at some point. We're not exactly sure what happens. So all of this is going on. Castiel tries to protect Poppy. Poppy attacks the Blood Queen, who's her mother, who is Isbeth. And then Isbeth shows that she has just crazy power and brings Poppy down. So Poppy is like struggling and writhing on the floor in terrible pain. And Castiel says, take me. If you want to control Poppy, just take me. She'll do anything, whatever. So then Castiel is now imprisoned by the Blood Queen, who is Isbeth. Absolutely horrible. Broke my heart. Poppy wakes up and she is just mourning the fact that her love is in the clutches of Isbeth, and it's horrible. We also see that Tawny is wounded somehow, but the Blood Queen gave Tawny as a present to Poppy, so we're not exactly sure what's going to go on there. So then Poppy journeys back without Castiel to Atlantia to meet with Eloana and Valen, and she pretty much freaks out on Eloana and says, how could you do this? The entire reason this war started was because of you and Isbeth, and it's absolutely ridiculous. All of these innocents have been killed because of you two fighting. So Poppy decides that she needs the Draken in order to kill Isbeth. And she also realizes that she's the descendant of not a deity, but she's the descendant of Malec, who's a god. So she's essentially has like crazy power, and she's a direct descendant from Nyktos. And once again, child of a god. So she goes back to the Elysium, meets with, or tries to talk to Nyktos. We find out that Nyktos actually went back to sleep and is now sleeping with his consort. And it's a Draken, and the Draken says, what do you need? And she ends up having this like, not prophecy, but not hallucination either, but she ends up seeing the blonde woman who like tells her what to say in order to get the Draken to help her. So the Draken end up telling her that one of their own, I forget her name, Jara, I believe, was taken, and the only way to wake up the consort and wake up Nyktos' consort is to get back the Draken Jara and also to get back Iris. Who is Iris? Well, we find out that Nyktos had two sons. He had Malec and he had Iris, and Poppy is actually the child of Iris, not Malec. So that was insane. So then Poppy finds out that the cave cat that she saw when she was with Ian visiting the Blood Queen is actually Iris, her father. So she has to save him in order to wake up the consort. We're not sure why that's important yet. If you read A Shadow in the Ember, you know. So that is her plan. So then we jump to the future a little bit. Poppy's training with all of her like cool godlike abilities, and she says she's going to meet with, or she wants to meet with the Blood Queen. She sends out a message, and she's supposed to have a meeting in a few days. So Poppy ends up going to this meeting, and with her she has all of the wolven, but she also has the Draken who are working with her. So when she gets to the meeting place, she is greeted by the Blood King, and he is just super condescending to her, and he was like, I came all the way over here, and are you gonna bow down, or like, what are you doing? And she's like, no, I've come to send a message. We also, this is super important, I completely forgot to mention, we did find out what the Revenants were between meeting with the Queen and now. The Revenants are something that the Queen has created, and they're these people that can't die. So the Queen actually demonstrates by like cutting the throat of the tiny little girl that's an assassin I was talking about, and she dies but then comes right back. So that's what the Revenants are, and that's what we need the Draken fire to kill. So anyway, the king comes with only one Revenant, doesn't have a lot of backup, and Poppy's really offended that they think so low of her. So then she ends up saying, I'm gonna need to send, or she tells the king she needs him to send a message to the Queen, and he belittles her, and she's like, you are the message. So then she cuts off the king's head, and it's awesome. Then the Revenant attacks, but then out come all of the Draken, and the Revenant's like, oh no, it's the one thing that can destroy me. So then that's pretty much how it ends. Poppy is now just in control of her godlike power, which is super awesome. She also has dragons. I love dragons. They're the best. And she is with the wolves, and hopefully she is going to get Castile back. So now I'm going to jump into a little bit more about the different bloodlines, the characters, and the gods. Hi guys, it's Editing Jess. I realized while I was editing this video, there are some very minor points that I forgot to mention. I don't think these things are very important in terms of plot. They were just kind of interesting. So I will leave them down in the description. So please check those out if you just want more information of A Crown of Gilded Bones. Now enjoy the rest of the video. All right, so first I'm going to go over Malec and Isbeth's story again, now that we have all of the information. So Malec was married to Queen Eloana, and they were ruling Atlantia. Malec ended up having an affair with Isbeth, and then Eloana actually poisoned Isbeth. This caused Malec to be very upset, and as she was dying, he ended up saving her life and turning her into a vampire. But we find out that Malec was actually not the descendant of Nyktos, but a descendant of Nyktos, but he was actually his immediate son. So he is much more powerful, and he's actually a god, not a deity. So when he ascended Isbeth, he actually turned her into this new creation. So she has these powers where she's able to do things similar to what Poppy can do, but she's not actually like an ascended. So that's that story. We also find out that Eloana, Castile's mother, ended up entombing Malec in the bones of this deity in this crypt. We also find out Eloana had assumed that Malec would have died. However, he's a god, not a deity, so he's probably not dead. He's probably actually just been trapped in this crypt, like going insane this entire time. Then another thing that we find out because of this book is that Malec actually has a twin brother named Iris. We don't know how Iris ended up having a child with Isbeth. That is still very confusing. I have some theories on it. But Isbeth and Iris are actually the parents of Poppy. Now we also find out, like I mentioned earlier, that Malec had a child with Isbeth as well. We don't know what happened to that child. Isbeth believes that child was killed. I have a feeling that child's still around, and we've already seen him. So that is what's going on with that story. Now we have Nyktos. You find out so much. I cannot tell you enough. Please go read A Shadow in the Ember if you have not already. And that he is the king of the gods, and we believe the wolven were actually created by him in order to protect the gods. And he had a consort who you find out a lot about in A Shadow in the Ember, and then I believe they had the two children, Malec and Iris. So that is what's going on there. So then we have the wolven, we have Jasper, whose son is Kieran, and Kieran is best friends pretty much with Castile and Poppy, and is now bonded to Poppy after being bonded with Castile almost his entire life. We also have Kieran's sister Venetta, who's this very good fighter, and he just had, in this book, a child was born, or not his child, he had a little sister that was born, so that all happened. with Poppy's power, we find out in From Blood and Ash and A Kingdom of Flash and Fire that she had the power to heal, but it was still very hard. So she can taste emotions, so she knows how people are feeling, but she's also able to project those emotions in order to cause pain or to heal. Well, they've all been very much amplified at this point. So at the end of A Crown of Gilded Bones, she can pretty much kill people at the drop of a hat just by thinking it. And it's very easy for her to access this well of power because she's realized that she's actually the direct child of a god. And it's really cool to see how much she has grown throughout this book. So those are pretty much everything that's going on with the characters, and that's it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this recap. I tried to cover as much as I could. I'm sure I left some things out. If you noticed any big issues, please let me know down in the comments below so I can fix it. And I cannot wait for the War of Two Queens to come out. I am so looking forward to this book. This is one of my favorite series. So I said this already, but I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week.